Welcome back to her Fireside Stories. She thought wearing black made her look like the widow until I handed her the prenup. The look on Serena's face, priceless. That smirk she wore when she strolled into Victor's funeral. Gone, I'd spent years shrinking in the shadows of betrayal. Ignored, dismissed, replaced. But grief doesn't make you weak. It clears your vision and this widow's revenge story. It wasn't loud, it was legal, strategic, and final. She may have had his attention at the end, but I had his signature when it mattered most. I still remember the exact moment my world shattered beneath the hush of the funeral parlor's vaulted ceilings. My husband, Victor Esperanza, lay inside a polished mahogany casket that seemed to glow under the cool lights. The faint aroma of lilies and polished wood hung in the stale air, a cloying perfume that wrapped itself around every breath I took. It should have been a solemn occasion, a day to mourn and reflect on the man I had once promised to love until death parted us. Yet, as I stood by the casket, my heart more numb than grieving, the church doors creaked open and in she walked. Her name was Serena Voss, though some knew her only as the Mistress. She wore her platinum blonde hair in a sleek chin-length bob, unapologetically modern, the kind of cut that seemed to say she had no interest in blending into the background. In a funeral full of subdued blacks and grays, her blood-red shawl stood out like a siren's call. She strode in with a confidence that radiated through the funeral hall. She looked around, found me with her hawk-like gaze, and tilted her chin up ever so slightly, the corners of her glossy lips curving in a half-smile that froze the marrow in my bones. That smirk was a trophy, her silent declaration that she'd won. I could hear the shift in the crowd's whispers, sense the weight of eyes flicking between us, the grieving widow and the woman who had inserted herself into my marriage. The hush that fell over the mourners wasn't respect. It was anticipation, like the tense moment before a rubber band snaps. My fingers curled around the edges of my small handbag, nails digging in, but I refused to look away. I'd done enough looking away over the years. I took a slow, steady breath. The woman I'd been before Dahlia Esperanza, who tolerated nights of suspicious phone calls and felt invisible while her husband soared in his career, would have shrunk, tears burning hot behind her eyes. But I'd lost too much already to let a brazen red shawl and a smirk intimidate me. Without a word, I slipped my hand into my purse, brushing my fingertips over the document that had become my secret lifeline. When I finally met Serena's gaze, I let the faintest hint of a smile cross my lips. She had no idea what was coming next. No idea that her smug confidence was about to be obliterated by the single piece of paper folded neatly in my bag. To understand how it all unraveled, you have to know where it began. Victor and I met in college when I was 19, and he was a sharp-suited 21-year-old majoring in economics. I was studying literature, a wide-eyed dreamer who wore my dark auburn hair in a messy bun and always had ink-stained fingers from scribbling poems in my notebooks. I was drawn to Victor's ambition, his neatly trimmed beard and the way he slicked his hair back with precision. He was from a family of modest means who believed in hard work, grit, and building your own destiny. I was from a small town with big hopes, the type that pinned inspirational quotes to my dorm wall. We married soon after graduation, full of a young love's bright optimism. Our wedding was small but felt grand to us, and after we exchanged vows, I wore my hair in a loose braid filled with flowers, a style that felt romantic and free, much like our early years together. We moved into a modest apartment, and I landed a job as a school librarian while Victor pursued a career in finance. For a time, life felt like an upward climb. We tackled hand in hand. We saved money, ate a lot of instant noodles, and spent weekends dreaming about a house with a yard where we could plant roses. Over the years, Victor's career soared. Promotions seemed to land in his lap like gifts from the universe. Eventually, we upgraded from our cramped apartment to a comfortable two-story house on Sycamore Lane with pale blue shutters and flower boxes that spilled over with vibrant blooms in the spring. He wore crisp suits, now always perfectly fitted, and I teased him about the time and product he spent styling his once casual hair into a neat side part. I meanwhile still loved my books and quiet corners, though I'd transitioned to tutoring students and writing freelance articles here and there. For a long while, it felt like we were building a solid partnership. When we bought our home, we also signed a prenuptial agreement. Victor insisted on it. At the time, it felt so formal, so businesslike. Just in case, he'd said, giving my shoulders a reassuring squeeze, "It protects us both." You never know what can happen in life, Dahlia. I remember that was the first time he mentioned that love needed something to back it up. Paperwork, laws, fine print. But I was in love, so I signed without question. I can pinpoint the exact moment the first hairline crack appeared in our marriage. It was at his company's annual gala, a lavish event in a grand ballroom draped in velvet curtains and illuminated by sparkling chandeliers. I'd spent hours picking out the perfect gown, emerald green to match my eyes, and even had a stylist blow out my auburn hair into soft waves. I wanted to feel elegant, to be the wife he'd be proud to introduce to his colleagues. And for a while, it felt perfect. Victor shook hands left and right, his polished loafers tapping against the marble floor as he moved from conversation to conversation. I clung to his arm with a polite smile plastered on my face. He seemed in his element, and I was proud of him, proud of how far he'd come, proud that we were there together. And then I saw her for the first time. Serena Voss, the new executive assistant. She glided into the ballroom in a black cocktail dress that showed off far more than I thought appropriate for a work event. Her platinum bob caught the light with every step, revealing subtle undertones of silver that gave her an almost futuristic edge. At first, I shrugged it off. Office assistants attended these galas all the time, but I saw Victor's smile transform the moment he spotted her. It softened, became more familiar. As she approached, she placed a manicured hand on his shoulder and said something that made him laugh. A real laugh, one I hadn't heard in our home for months. I felt a pang, a slight chill in my bones, but I dismissed it as paranoia. What I couldn't ignore was the rest of the night. Serena always near him, leaning in a bit too close, whispering in his ear and giggling. She acted as though I was invisible, and Victor, for the most part, let her. I remember asking him quietly if everything was okay, and he brushed me off, telling me I was reading too much into simple professional camaraderie, but the seed of doubt had taken root. By the end of that night, I felt like I was outside looking in, watching my own husband be more attuned to someone else's words, someone else's presence than mine. Life after that was a slow unraveling. I tried to deny the obvious at first. Victor came home later and later muttering excuses about deadlines and late-night meetings. My once comforting routine, cooking dinner, talking about our day, eroded under the weight of his distracted silence. His hair, once a simple style, he maintained himself, was now trimmed at upscale barbershops where he'd linger for client lunches that stretched longer than they should. I learned the scent of an unfamiliar perfume on his collar, a floral note with a sharper edge than mine. But I was still Dahlia, the quiet dreamer who believed that perseverance, kindness, and open communication could solve anything. So I tried. I really did. I set up date nights, made him his favorite meals, left little notes in his briefcase, reminding him how proud I was. Yet every gesture felt like it landed in a void swallowed by his phone calls, his business trips, or an uninterested shrug. He wasn't cruel. He was simply absent. My sister Paula saw the changes before I admitted them to myself. Paula, with her sporty pixie cut and a blunt honesty that sometimes hurt more than it helped, told me point blank that she suspected Victor was pulling away and that I had every right to be concerned. "Don't let him overshadow you, Dahlia," she warned me one evening, her voice tight. You've always given up too much for him. Your own writing career, your time, your sense of self. I argued with her, telling her that marriage required compromise and sacrifice, that Victor was just under a lot of pressure. But deep down, I knew something was slipping away. The first real confrontation between us happened shortly after a business trip he took to San Diego. He came back exhausted, or so he claimed, and when I tried to greet him with a kiss, he turned his cheek and mumbled something about being too tired. It was a small act, but it cut me raw because it made me realize I could no longer pretend our love was enough to ward off the storm that seemed to be gathering. Shortly after that trip, Victor's behavior escalated from distant to outright dismissive. He didn't introduce me to his colleagues at corporate events anymore, nor did he invite me to the smaller, more exclusive dinners. When I once gently brought up the idea of going on a couple's getaway, a chance for us to reconnect and discuss our future, he sighed as though I'd asked for the moon. "I'm swamped at work," he said, combing his hair back in the mirror with practiced care. "Maybe next quarter." My heartbreak turned into numb acceptance. I went through the motions of being a dutiful wife while feeling the sting of rejection in every corner of our once warm home. I noticed odd charges on our credit card statements. Dinners at high-end restaurants when he was supposed to be traveling, spa appointments at luxury places I'd never visited. Confronting him felt pointless. Each time he'd wave it off as client-related or a necessary expense, he'd forgotten to log under his business account. The rift between us grew, but it was still intangible enough for me to question if I was overreacting. That changed the day my parents celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. I'd helped plan a lavish backyard party, string lights, a small band, and a buffet of my mother's favorite dishes. I had my hair in a simple half-up, half-down style, that day practical, and a nod to my mother's preference for less fuss. I wanted everything to be perfect for them. Victor arrived late, and I felt a creeping dread as soon as I saw he wasn't alone. There, stepping out of the passenger side of our SUV, was Serena, her sleek bob highlighted with strands of silver eyes, bright with unspoken confidence. She sashayed into my parents' backyard as if she owned the place, greeting guests with a polite veneer, but throwing me a glance that said she knew exactly what she was doing. My mother, who had always been polite to a fault, stood there frozen for a fraction of a second when Victor introduced Serena as a close colleague helping with a project. The energy shifted, guests shot each other looks, and I felt the sting of tears welling up. Everyone at that party spoke in hushed tones, tiptoeing around the obvious. My father's proud grin flickered into a troubled frown. My sister Paula looked ready to smash a champagne glass on the lawn and confront Victor outright. But I shook my head, begging her silently not to create a scene for our parents' sake. Victor, oblivious or uncaring, chatted with Serena near the buffet table, ignoring the bewildered expressions from my relatives. I lasted exactly an hour and 15 minutes before I ducked inside, heading for the upstairs bathroom. Leaning against the counter, I stared at my reflection. My eyes looked tired, the eyeliner smudged slightly in the corners. The woman looking back at me was not the bright college graduate who believed love was a shield against all forms of heartbreak. She was someone else, someone who was unraveling. When I emerged, I found Victor alone for a moment. I tried to talk to ask why he would bring her here of all places, but before I could confront him, he brushed me off again. "Look, Dahlia, don't make a scene. This is your parents' party," he said, almost bored. Serena came to help me finalize some notes before Monday's presentation. A presentation on a Saturday at my parents' house. That was the moment I realized I could no longer stay. Something inside me finally snapped. The illusions broke, and I knew if I didn't leave this marriage, I would lose myself completely. So I slipped away, texted Paula that I was heading home, and drove back to our empty house. By the time Victor returned, I had packed an overnight bag and was waiting for a taxi. He didn't even ask me why, like gripping stories that dive into the depths of love and betrayal. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more riveting tales. I moved in with Paula that night, trembling with heartbreak, but determined to reclaim what little dignity I had left. In the days that followed, Victor didn't call, didn't come after me. A part of me foolishly had expected him to realize what he'd lost, but his silence spoke louder than any apology could have. Living with Paula was a strange mix of comfort and shame. Comfort because she enveloped me in a kind of unwavering support I hadn't experienced in years. She was the older sister who ruffled my hair, now cut to a shoulder-length style, I'd chosen in a moment of self-assertion, and told me I deserved so much more than what Victor was giving shame. Because deep down I was grappling with the idea that I had failed at marriage. For a while, I tried to keep myself occupied, taking on more tutoring gigs, volunteering at the local library, even trying to finish a short story I'd been working on for ages. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart lurched, hoping it was Victor wanting to fix things, but it never was. Eventually, I stopped hoping. The real turning point came one rainy afternoon when I ventured back to the house to collect more of my belongings. I hadn't seen Victor in weeks, and part of me hoped he would be out so I could move in peace. Instead, I found him in the kitchen, rummaging through drawers, as if searching for something. The sink was piled with dishes, and the living room was strewn with items I didn't recognize. Perfume bottles, hair clips, and bizarrely enough, a plush bathrobe embroidered with SV. When he noticed me, he didn't seem upset or happy. He just looked inconvenienced, as if my presence was an interruption. "If you came to grab your stuff, fine," he said coldly. "Just don't rearrange anything." The reality that Serena had essentially moved in struck me along with the wave of humiliation that I was the intruder in my own home. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to tell him how wrong it was that he'd replaced me so effortlessly. But instead, I gathered my boxes, grabbed the last photo album of our wedding, and turned to leave. Just as I reached the door, I heard Victor mumble, "You left. What did you expect?" That single sentence sealed the fate of our broken marriage. I walked away, cheeks burning, but feeling a clarity I hadn't before. On Paula's couch that evening, I couldn't stop shaking. Anger, grief, and a profound sense of betrayal coursed through my veins like poison. Paula handed me a mug of chamomile tea, but I hardly tasted it. My mind kept replaying Victor's dismissive face, the clutter of Serena's belongings strewn about the house I'd once painstakingly decorated. "I can't believe this is happening," I muttered, tears threatening to spill. "I gave him everything. I built my life around him." Paula, her pixie cut, framing her face, placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You did," she said softly. "But now it's time to build your life for yourself." That night I tossed and turned. I dreamt of the old days when Victor and I decorated our first Christmas tree, burning dinner, but laughing through the smoke alarm screech waking up. I felt a deep ache, not for him exactly, but for the version of us that existed back then. Determined to take back control, I started sorting through old files, bank statements, and personal documents I'd brought with me. That's when I found it. The thick envelope with prenuptial agreements scrawled in Victor's handwriting. It had been years since I'd even thought about it. At the time we signed it, it seemed like a technicality. It protected both of us if anything unexpected happened. We joked that our love was so strong we'd never need it. Curiosity led me to reread the clauses, the details carefully crafted by an attorney. To my shock, there was a very explicit section about infidelity. If either party was found to have engaged in an extramarital affair, they would forfeit all claims to jointly held assets. Essentially, the cheating spouse would lose everything. My hands trembled as I read those lines again and again. I felt a whirl of emotions, relief, vindication, and a slow-building sense of power. Victor and Serena might have thought they had me cornered, but this document said otherwise. After discovering the clause, I felt a strange calm settle over me. It wasn't happiness exactly, more like the certainty of someone who finally sees that the battlefield they've been dragged onto is one where they actually hold the trump card. I took the prenup to an attorney friend. Paula recommended a no-nonsense woman named Caroline Rosen, who wore her curly silver-streaked hair in a tight knot. She scanned the document with the kind of practiced eye that immediately told me she meant business. "This is ironclad," Caroline said, tapping the infidelity clause with a manicured finger. "Have you documented any proof of Victor's affair?" My face heated. "Well, I have photos of him and Serena together at various events. Some questionable receipts. He hasn't been subtle about it. And frankly, we have mutual friends who know he's been carrying on with her openly." Caroline nodded, already scribbling notes. "Let's gather as much as we can. Once we've got it, we'll file. He'll have no choice but to concede. This is extremely favorable to you." Dahlia. Walking out of Caroline's office, I felt like I was seeing the world through a different lens. I'd spent so long feeling small, overshadowed by Victor's presence and Serena's brazen intrusion. Now, with each step, I felt a bit of my old confidence, my old self returning. I had no desire to publicly shame him. I just wanted justice. Over the next few weeks, I moved methodically. Paula helped me collect every bit of evidence: photos, text messages, even social media posts. I opened my own bank account, slowly shifting funds from our joint accounts, as permitted by the agreement, to ensure I'd have enough financial independence. I refused to let rage or heartbreak cloud my judgment. I knew exactly what needed to be done. All the while, Victor seemed blissfully unaware. He paraded Serena around work, showing up at corporate galas with her on his arm. Colleagues, some of whom were sympathetic to me, discreetly slipped me more proof. The more I gathered, the calmer I became. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life. And for the first time, I felt fully capable of doing so. The final blow came sooner than I anticipated, one that neither I nor Victor ever saw coming. He had a heart condition no one knew about, a genetic predisposition that could have been detected if he had gone for regular checkups. But Victor was too busy chasing deals, forging new business connections, and apparently engaging in a not-so-secret affair to worry about doctor visits. One Monday morning, he was in a board meeting when it happened: a massive cardiac arrest. By the time the paramedics arrived, it was too late. The news reached me that afternoon. I was sitting with Paula at a cafe, absently stirring my coffee, when her phone buzzed. She looked at the message, then at me, her face draining of color. "Dahlia," she whispered, "Victor collapsed and—" She didn't have to finish the sentence. I knew grief doesn't always strike like lightning. Sometimes it's a slow wave that pulls you under before you realize you're drowning. 1,000 memories flashed through my mind. The first time we danced at a college party, the day we closed on the house. Quiet mornings, reading side by side on the couch. Despite everything, a part of me had loved him. Even after the betrayal, I'd clung to an echo of our past. And now he was gone forever, sealed off from apologies or explanations. Funeral preparations were a blur, handled mostly by his relatives and corporate associates. I was considered the estranged wife, but legally I was still his spouse. Serena, however, didn't care about legalities. She made it clear she believed she was the real love of his life. She posted tributes on social media, arrived at the funeral home days in advance, insisting on picking the coffin and the floral arrangements. Matilda Esperanza, my mother-in-law, who wore her thin curled hair in a strict bob, seemed torn, clearly anxious about all the swirling tensions. I attended out of duty, but also out of a need to see this chapter through. The funeral was not a grand religious ceremony, but a subdued affair in a modern chapel with floor-to-ceiling windows. I wore a simple black dress and let my auburn hair fall naturally around my shoulders. I arrived quietly, slipping into a seat near the back. When Serena walked in swathed in a black designer gown that hugged her figure and wearing her signature platinum bob with unwavering confidence, my stomach churned. The sight of her strolling toward Victor's coffin like a victor collecting her spoils made my blood run cold. She smirked. That smirk will stay with me forever. It wasn't a grin of sadness, nor a polite, sorrowful smile. It was the expression of someone certain they'd won a game, certain they'd triumphed over their rival. She glided down the aisle, ignoring the hush that fell over the mourners. Her presence drew every eye in the room as if she were the main attraction at some morbid stage production. I could feel the tension rising, a wave of confusion and whispered speculation. Did they think I would cause a scene? I didn't move. I merely observed her from where I sat. A quiet, pulsing anger flickered in my chest, but it wasn't the same fury I'd felt when I first discovered her affair with Victor. This was cooler, more resolved. She reached the casket, laid a hand on it, and cast her gaze back toward me. That's when it happened, that slow, deliberate upturn of her lips as if to say, "Look who's left behind now." It was then that I knew I had to deliver the final truth, not for revenge, but for clarity, for justice. I stood up, heart pounding, but determined not to let my hands tremble. The crowd seemed to hold its collective breath as I approached. My footsteps echoed on the tiled floor. In the distance, Matilda dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, not entirely sure which direction to turn her grief. Paula stood at the edge of the aisle, her pixie hair framing her tense expression, silently rooting for me. Serena turned fully to face me, one brow arched. Her lips parted, but before she could speak, I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded document. The hush in the room deepened, the rustle of clothing and shifting feet, almost deafening. With a calm I didn't fully feel, I handed the paper to her. She accepted it with a cocky flick of her wrist, but as her eyes scanned the page registering the official stamps, the signatures and the explicit terms of Victor's prenuptial agreement, I watched that smirk melt away. For a few seconds, she just stared at the page. A few of the mourners leaned in, curiosity piqued Serena's face, lost color. She glanced up at me, eyes wide, lips moving, but no sound emerging. The quiet was so profound you could hear the hum of the overhead lights. Then a murmur spread through the attendees, swirling rumors flaring to life in real time. No one needed me to explain the significance of that document. It screamed its implications all on its own. By violating the fidelity clause, Victor had effectively barred himself, and by extension, any claims from his mistress from sharing in the joint assets. The law recognized me as the sole beneficiary of everything we owned together, and now that he was gone, she couldn't twist his words or seduce him into rewriting his will. I let her stand there speechless for a heartbeat longer. Then quietly I said, "You're free to keep any of the personal gifts he gave you. But the rest, it's mine." There was no malice in my tone, just a simple statement of fact. I turned the soft click of my heels, echoing in the stunned silence. In that moment, I felt lighter, as if someone had lifted a weight off my shoulders. The hush behind me lingered for what seemed like an eternity before the hushed conversations erupted. Outside, the cool air bit into my cheeks. I inhaled deeply, steadying my breath. The sun, hidden for days behind gloomy clouds, dared to peek through. My mind spun, replaying the look on Serena's face. The satisfaction wasn't in her humiliation. It was in knowing I'd finally stood up for myself, something I should have done long before. Enjoying this emotional journey? Make sure to hit that subscribe button for more riveting and empowering stories. When I finally left the grounds, I didn't feel triumphant exactly, but I felt justified. It was closure, or the closest thing to it, in the messy wake of betrayal and unexpected loss. I would later discover the fuller breadth of what Victor left behind: properties, investments, and a tangled web of personal drama. But in that instant, none of it mattered more than reclaiming the dignity I thought I'd lost for good. In the days that followed, word of the funeral confrontation spread through Victor's social circles like wildfire. I received a torrent of phone calls and messages, some from people I barely knew. Colleagues expressed everything from sympathy to thinly veiled curiosity, wanting the inside scoop on how I'd managed to outmaneuver Serena friends, who drifted away once the rumors of Victor's affair became undeniable, suddenly reappeared, offering belated support. Serena unsurprisingly attempted to do damage control. She posted cryptic messages on social media about being wronged, insinuating that there was more to the story. But I refused to engage publicly. Let the documents speak for themselves. If she wanted to fight this in court, she'd face the same ironclad agreement that had left her speechless at the funeral. From what I heard through mutual acquaintances, she spent a lot of time calling Victor's legal team, searching for loopholes that didn't exist. Meanwhile, I began the grueling process of sorting out Victor's estate. It was bittersweet. On one hand, the assets he'd left behind were substantial. On the other, I felt a constant ache, remembering that once upon a time, we'd planned to grow old together, build a family, create a lasting legacy. Now I was alone navigating the aftermath of both heartbreak and tragedy. Matilda, my mother-in-law, reached out hesitantly. At first, she seemed conflicted, torn between her loyalty to her son and the reality that he'd left me in an impossible position. Eventually, her guilt outweighed her pride, and she apologized for not intervening when she saw the signs of his affair. I accepted her apology, recognizing that grief complicated everything. In an odd twist, we bonded over the shared sense of loss. She'd lost a son, and I'd lost the future I once believed in. Over tea one afternoon, Matilda confessed she'd suspected something was wrong, but never had the courage to confront her son. He was always so sure of himself. She murmured, fingers trembling around her porcelain cup. I never wanted to believe he'd hurt you. Despite the swirl of drama legal meetings and administrative tasks, I found myself grappling with an emptiness I couldn't quite name. My heart had been so consumed with anger and betrayal that I'd barely processed Victor's death. It felt surreal to consider that the man who once made me laugh so hard I'd snort coffee out my nose was gone forever. We hadn't spoken a single word of closure. No final confessions, no apologies, no last attempts at saving our marriage. On a quiet morning, I mustered the courage to revisit the house on Sycamore Lane. It belonged to me now, according to the law. But stepping inside was like descending into a time capsule, each room echoing with memories. The living room still had the tufted couch where we'd binge-watch detective series. The coffee table was strewn with magazines I had collected for recipe ideas. His final coffee mug sat on the kitchen counter, a faint lipstick stain, not mine, clinging to the rim. I wandered from room to room, letting the pangs of memory wash over me. Photos of us dotted the walls, the two of us at a beach in Mexico. My hair then in braided pigtails under a sun hat, and him in casual shorts, a wide grin that crinkled his eyes. I paused at one particular photo where he held me in his arms at a friend's wedding, my face glowing with unfiltered joy. My chest tightened. So much had changed. How had it happened so gradually, yet felt so sudden? As I cleared out drawers, I discovered more traces of Serena's shopping receipts for expensive lingerie, perfume bottles in the bathroom, and a half-empty bottle of her shampoo in the shower. Part of me wanted to toss them into a bin fire out of pure indignation, but all I felt was a heavy sorrow for how our lives had derailed. It was painful to accept that the man smiling in all those pictures had been capable of betraying me so thoroughly. Eventually, I packed a small bag of personal keepsakes and drove away without looking back. That house was mine legally, but it also stood as a monument to a life I no longer wanted. I knew I needed distance and a fresh start. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I finally sat down with Caroline Rosen to iron out the estate details. The meeting took place in a sleek conference room in her law firm's downtown high-rise. floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city cars, bustling streets, and a river that shimmered under the afternoon sun. Caroline, her curly hair now pinned up more loosely spread out, a series of documents explaining each one methodically. "There's a considerable portfolio here," she told me, tapping a finger on a spreadsheet that outlined everything from real estate investments to stock portfolios. "By the terms of the prenup, it's all yours to manage and distribute as you see fit." My breath caught in an odd twist of fate. The man who had pushed me to sign that prenup had ensured I'd be protected from the very betrayal he ended up committing. But money wasn't the only burden. A few of Victor's business partners believed Serena was owed something, having supported him in his final months. They peppered me with letters, phone calls, even a request for a meeting. Caroline merely raised an eyebrow. "You're under no obligation to entertain these demands. The law is on your side." "Dahlia." Sometimes I felt a pang of guilt. Should I toss Serena out onto the street with no compensation, no acknowledgement of the months she spent with Victor? Then I reminded myself that she'd knowingly inserted herself into a marriage, reaping the benefits without any concern for my well-being. Guilt, I realized, was misplaced. Serena had made her choices with full knowledge of the consequences. The difference was she never expected me to have a backbone, much less a legally binding prenup. Leaving the law firm, I clutched the folder of documents to my chest. The city seemed louder than usual. Car horns, construction, the hum of chatter on the sidewalks. Maybe it was because I was more awake than I'd felt in a long time. For better or worse, I was free. Free from Victor's dismissive shadow. Free from Serena's smugness. Free from the illusions that had kept me chained to a one-sided marriage. A sense of liberation mingled with uncertainty. What does one do after reclaiming a life that was nearly lost to betrayal? I spent days in reflection, journaling and sifting through old photographs. I discovered a version of Dahlia I hadn't seen in years. A woman who loved scribbling stories late into the night, who had once wanted to publish a novel. That Dahlia had been put on a shelf the moment Victor's ambitions took center stage, overshadowing my smaller, quieter dreams. On a whim, I decided to travel alone. I booked a ticket to a small beachside town up north, a place known for tranquil coasts and rocky cliffs. Packing light, I stuffed a suitcase with comfortable clothes, a notebook, and a folder of legal documents, just in case Paula offered to join me, but I politely declined, feeling this was something I needed to do for myself. The day I arrived, the sky was an endless stretch of pale blue, the sea frothing in white-tipped waves against the shore. I checked into a modest cottage that overlooked the beach, then kicked off my shoes and wandered down to the water. The sand felt coarse beneath my feet, and the salty breeze whipped strands of my auburn hair around my face. I breathed in, letting the ocean's roar fill my ears. At first, I felt disoriented by the sheer openness of it all. For years, my world had been confined to Victor's scheduled corporate dinners and the quiet heartbreak of nights spent alone. Here, under the vast sky, there was no schedule, no heartbreak that I couldn't leave behind on the sand. I spent the afternoon simply watching seagulls dip and dive, scribbling fragments of stories in my notebook. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of pink and orange, I found a piece of driftwood and wrote my name on it along with a short poem about finding light in darkness. Placing it at the water's edge, I watched the tide sweep it away. It felt symbolic, a ritual of letting go of Victor, of Serena, of the future I thought I'd have. For the first time in months, I felt a stirring of something akin to hope, like a small flame flickering to life within my chest. I ended up staying at the beachside cottage longer than planned. Each sunrise became a chance to rediscover something I'd forgotten about myself. I woke early to write. Sometimes I'd pen furious paragraphs about betrayal, heartbreak, and the messy complexities of love. Other times, I'd craft light-hearted tales that had nothing to do with my reality. In those moments, I felt truly alive, tethered to my dreams, rather than to the mistakes of my past. Locals were friendly in a laid-back coastal way. An older fisherman named Robert, sporting a bushy beard and a permanently weathered expression, taught me how to recognize rip currents. His daughter Fiona hair in braided pigtails to keep it out of the wind, ran a small cafe that served the best clam chowder I'd ever tasted. I'd sit there in the afternoon sipping chowder and reading books I'd meant to get to for years. Though Victor was gone, the finality of it often caught me off guard. One evening, I sat on the porch, phone in hand, half tempted to message him about something trivial, like an interesting article or a silly memory that popped into my head, realizing I couldn't made me weep. Not for what he'd done, but for the ghost of who he'd been to me before everything shattered. Some nights I'd walk along the shore with my notebook capturing the lullaby of waves and short stanzas of poetry. I hadn't felt that creative in a decade. The salt-laden breeze was gradually washing away my anger, reminding me that life could still be beautiful, still be full of possibility even after betrayal and death. I also did some soul-searching about what to do with the assets left behind. The house on Sycamore Lane loomed large in my mind, filled with memories both sweet and bitter. A big part of me wanted to sell it to cut ties with the heartbreak it represented, yet another part wondered if renovating it could be a way to reclaim the space. After all, it was my house now, not Victor's or Serena's. Perhaps making it my own, from the color of the walls to the furniture, would be the final step in this strange journey of recovery. Eventually, I decided to return home. I felt as if I had recaptured enough of my spirit to face the remnants of my old life without crumbling. Pulling onto Sycamore Lane, I noticed the yard was overgrown. Weeds had sprouted in the flower beds where I once cultivated petunias. The mailbox overflowed with flyers and junk mail. It was a jarring sight, but I wasn't deterred. I parked, took a deep breath, and walked up to the front door, keys jingling in my hand. Inside, the air was stale thick with disuse. I flicked on the lights. Dust motes danced in the beams. Over the next few weeks, I immersed myself in a massive cleanup effort. I threw away anything that bore Serena's mark, from half-empty shampoos to old receipts that reeked of betrayal. I packed up items that belonged to Victor, boxing them with a strange mix of sorrow and relief. Then came the renovations. I hired a team to repaint the walls, opting for brighter, more inviting colors than the ones Victor and I had chosen in our more conservative tastes. In the living room, I tore up the old carpet and put in hardwood floors, a dream I'd had for ages. With each change, I felt a spark of excitement, as though I was reclaiming not just the space, but also pieces of myself I'd abandoned. At one point, I unearthed an old trunk in the attic filled with family heirlooms. Tucked under a moth-eaten blanket, I found a collection of letters Victor had written me during our first year of marriage, back when his hair was still unstyled and his dreams were humble. For a moment, I felt tears prick my eyes. I read a few lines, letting the nostalgia wash over me, but the sadness was gentler now, no longer threatening to swallow me whole. I put the letters away, deciding to keep them as proof that once upon a time there was real love, even if it was later overshadowed by mistakes and betrayal. If this story of transformation resonates with you, consider subscribing to our channel. We've got more inspiring tales coming your way soon, with every nail hammered and every coat of paint dried. The house took on a new character, mine, and with it, I felt my identity solidify, no longer tethered to the shadows of a past life, but anchored in the promise of what I could become. By the time I was done, renovating the house looked unrecognizable from the one where Serena had pranced around so confidently. I changed everything from the curtains to the light fixtures to the furniture arrangement. In the kitchen, where Victor had once lectured me on our grocery budget, I installed new cabinets and replaced the old linoleum with warm tiles. Every corner felt transformed, echoing the metamorphosis happening inside me. Matilda paid me a visit one afternoon. She wore her hair shorter now, peppered with silver, and styled in loose waves, a subtle shift that mirrored her own journey through grief. As she walked through each newly painted room, she occasionally touched a wall or ran her finger along a windowsill, as if trying to reconcile the old memories with this fresh start. Victor would never have imagined this place like this, she remarked, her voice tinged with melancholy. But it's beautiful, Dahlia. You've done well. I simply smiled, grateful for her kindness, but unwilling to dwell on what Victor would have wanted. This was my home now, no longer shaped by his preferences or overshadowed by his absence. Paula, on the other hand, reacted with unbridled enthusiasm. She practically danced through the rooms, exclaiming how proud she was that I'd taken control of my life. Together, we sipped celebratory coffee in the new living room. She teased me about turning the spare bedroom into a writing studio, encouraging me to finally chase the dream I'd sidelined for too long. Amid the well wishes, I still caught the occasional rumor about Serena. The last I heard, she had moved to a smaller city, possibly trying to rebuild her life after the inheritance fiasco. I felt a pang of pity for her. As much as she'd hurt me, she also lost someone she claimed to love and ended up with nothing to show for it. But compassion aside, I refused to let her re-enter my life in any capacity. Too much had happened and my world was finally stable without her shadow at the edges. At night, the house hummed with a new kind of peace. Where once I cried myself to sleep, I now rested with a sense of belonging. I hadn't just survived Victor's betrayal. I'd reclaimed myself in the process. My decision to finally embrace my writing aspirations came almost by accident. One morning while sorting through paperwork, I stumbled upon an old short story I'd written in college. Reading it was like slipping into a time machine, back to an era where I believed words could shape entire worlds and hearts could heal through honest storytelling. With a newfound determination, I cleared out the spare room, set up a simple desk by the window, and repurposed an old armchair as a reading nook. I pinned a calendar on the wall scheduling writing sessions, the way I would schedule any important appointment. Initially, the words came slowly halting, but each day I found my flow a bit easier to tap into. Paula and a few close friends read my early drafts, offering feedback and encouragement. It wasn't always praise. Sometimes they pointed out glaring plot holes or suggested I refine certain characters. Yet I cherished their honesty. It felt good to be challenged in a pursuit that was mine alone, not tethered to the duties of being someone's wife. As the pages multiplied, so did my sense of purpose. The therapy sessions I'd been attending also helped me unpack the residual trauma of Victor's betrayal. My therapist, a softly spoken woman named Dr. Reed, praised me for transforming pain into creative energy. She was the one who first labeled what I was doing as rediscovering your authentic self. I liked that phrase. It made the process feel less like escaping a nightmare and more like journeying toward a brighter horizon. Occasionally, I'd sit back and think about how drastically my life had changed in such a short span of time. From the devastation of losing a cheating husband to the whirlwind of confronting his mistress at his funeral, and finally to standing on my own 2 feet, renovating a house and forging a new path. It was humbling, exhilarating, and a reminder that life can pivot in directions you never see coming. If anyone had told me a year ago that I'd be living here alone and writing stories again, I would have laughed at the absurdity. But here I was finding meaning in each new day. One afternoon, a letter from the local community college arrived in my mailbox. They were hosting a literary festival and inviting local writers to speak or present their works. Normally, I would have brushed it off as something for real authors, but a spark of audacity flared within me. What if I submitted one of my short stories? Even if I didn't win any recognition, the act of participating would be a statement to myself that I was serious about this new chapter of my life. I spent the weekend polishing a piece about heartbreak and rebirth, loosely inspired by my experiences, but reframed in a fictional setting. The protagonist was a woman named Rosa who discovered her husband's betrayal and fled to a coastal village to find herself again. It wasn't exactly my story, but the themes of loss and renewal were intimately tied to my own journey. Nerves gnawed at me as I emailed my submission. For days afterward, I could hardly focus on anything else. Every time my phone chimed with a new email, my stomach twisted in knots. Eventually, I told myself that it didn't matter whether it got accepted. What mattered was that I was stepping forward, embracing possibilities, rather than cowering in the safety of the familiar. Meanwhile, life continued in a surprisingly balanced way. I found new routines: morning coffee on the freshly renovated porch afternoon, writing sessions and evening walks around the neighborhood where curious neighbors stopped to chat about my lovely new hair or the incredible job I'd done to the house. A sense of community grew. These were people who'd once whispered about Victor's affair, but who now acknowledged me as more than just the woman he cheated on. On nights when insomnia crept in, I'd revisit old photo albums, but now the sense of loss didn't swamp me. I'd smile at younger versions of myself and Victor, acknowledging the good times, without pretending the later betrayal didn't happen. Sometimes acceptance isn't a line in the sand. It's a slow tide that washes over your wounds until you realize you can breathe again. The literary festival acceptance email came on a Tuesday morning, landing in my inbox. Just as I was sipping my second cup of coffee, I nearly spilled the mug when I saw the subject line: "Congratulations, your short story has been selected." My heart hammered as I read the confirmation they wanted me to do a reading in front of a small audience. Pure terror mingled with excitement. I'd never read my work publicly before, but after everything I'd endured, what was a little stage fright compared to confronting a mistress at my own husband's funeral? In a surge of renewed courage, I replied with a humble acceptance. Paula cheered when I told her, hugging me so tightly I could hardly breathe. The festival day arrived under clear skies. I wore a simple navy dress and pinned my auburn hair into a loose updo, elegant but not fussy. Standing behind the podium, I surveyed the modest crowd. My hands trembled slightly on the pages of my manuscript, but when I caught Paula's encouraging grin, I let out a steadying breath and began to read. The story tumbled out, each sentence laced with echoes of heartbreak and hope. As I read, I felt a wave of emotion pass through me. Memories of Victor the Prenup, Serena's smirk. By the time I reached the final words, I realized I wasn't shaking out of fear, but from the sheer intensity of releasing my truth into the world, even if disguised as fiction. The applause took me by surprise. Strangers came up afterward, commending me for the raw emotion of the piece. A few asked if I had other works they could read, or if I planned to publish a collection. The sense of validation was overwhelming, not because they liked my story, but because I'd faced my vulnerability head on and found a community of people who resonated with it. That night, I celebrated with Paula, sipping champagne in my newly painted living room. "Mom and Dad would be proud," she said softly, clinking her glass against mine. I nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. For once, these tears weren't about loss. They were about a future brimming with potential. As the months rolled on, more opportunities trickled in. I was invited to join a local writers group that met weekly to workshop pieces. I hesitated but ultimately joined, spurred by the realization that I wanted to immerse myself in a circle of creativity and growth. The group consisted of an eclectic mix of personalities: a retired teacher with a passion for historical fiction, a single mom working on a series of children's books, and a young barista who dabbled in spoken word poetry. Reading their manuscripts, offering feedback, and receiving critiques in return felt like a new form of therapy. Each session reminded me that vulnerability wasn't a weakness. It was a catalyst for forming genuine connections. Through these meetings, I made a few close friends who had no idea about my past unless I chose to share it. They knew me simply as Dahlia the writer, which was a liberating identity shift from Dahlia, the cheated wife. Meanwhile, the final legal proceedings around Victor's estate concluded more smoothly than I'd anticipated. Serena, after her initial outrage, seemed to accept that she had no claim. There was no dramatic lawsuit or last-minute legal ambush. Perhaps she realized the prenup was unbreakable, or maybe she just wanted to distance herself from the scandal. Either way, I no longer felt the sting of her presence hovering over my life like a dark cloud. I continued therapy sessions with Dr. Reed, reflecting on how far I'd come. We discussed my growing sense of self, my new career path, and the remnants of grief that still lingered. It's normal to feel echoes of sorrow even after you've moved on, she told me gently. Grief is like an ocean wave. Sometimes it recedes, but it can rush back when you least expect it. One late afternoon, I received a visit from Matilda, who seemed lighter than I'd ever seen her. She brought homemade cookies and told me she was moving to a smaller condo by the lake. This house holds memories, but I need a fresh start too, she admitted. We spoke for hours, sharing stories about Victor, not the unfaithful man he became, but the boy who learned to ride a bike, the teenager who mowed neighbors' lawns to earn pocket money, the young adult who wanted to conquer the world. That evening after Matilda left, I sat in the living room with the lights dimmed. A sense of peace settled over me. There was no longer a war between anger and sadness in my chest, just a quiet acceptance of life's unpredictability. Yes, betrayal had shattered my illusions. Yes, death had claimed any chance of reconciliation. But somehow in the wreckage, I found a stronger, braver version of Dahlia. I looked around the room at the fresh walls, the new furnishings, and the personal touches. I'd added mementos from my beach getaway, framed poems, and photographs of me and Paula laughing at a cafe downtown. Everything felt distinctly, undeniably mine, like stories of triumph, resilience, and new beginnings. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel for a front row seat to more moving narratives. In a moment of reflection, I fished out my phone and scrolled through old photos. There was Victor dashing in a suit, beaming at some corporate event. There was me, hair once styled in braids, giggling at something off camera. I couldn't bring myself to delete them. Not because I still loved him, but because that was part of my journey. Losing him first emotionally, then physically, had been devastating, but it had also paved the way for me to find my own voice. As I closed the photo gallery, a memory floated up standing at the funeral, slipping that prenup into Serena's hand, watching her confidence crumble. That was the moment I'd finally taken back power, not from her, but from my own fears, the sadness, the betrayal. They no longer defined me. They were chapters in a book that was still being written, chapters that led me to discover depths of courage I never knew I possessed. Tomorrow I would wake up, brew a fresh cup of coffee, and spend the morning writing. Maybe I'd jot down a scene about heartbreak, or maybe I'd explore a whimsical tale about wizards and dragons. Whatever I wrote, it would be my choice, my words, my future. And in that small yet profound realization, I found the closure I had been chasing for so long. Life doesn't offer neat fairy tale endings. Rather, it provides a mosaic of moments, some painful, some joyful, all contributing to the tapestry of who we become. In the months and years that followed the funeral, I continued crafting stories, forming new friendships, and nurturing the relationship with my sister Paula that had only deepened under crisis. I also maintained a cautious but respectful connection with Matilda, as she remained the last living link to Victor's past that felt worth preserving. Each step forward confirmed that my identity wasn't bound to being Victor's wife or the scorned widow, nor did it hinge on the validation of that smug mistress who once smirked at me in front of his coffin. My identity was forged in the daily choices, painting a wall bright yellow, because it made me smile spending a weekend alone at a cabin to focus on writing, or simply saying no when something felt off. Eventually, I published my first collection of short stories. Appropriately, it centered on the theme of renewal. To my surprise and gratitude, it garnered modest success in local literary circles. In interviews, I hinted at personal heartbreak, but never dwelled on specifics. I had no desire to rehash the ugliness. The meaningful parts of my life story now lay in the aftermath and how I chose to heal and thrive. Sometimes strangers would ask me for advice, curious about how I found the strength to reinvent myself after such a public betrayal. My answer was always the same. The turning point came when I realized I deserved the same love and loyalty I'd been giving someone else. That realization, coupled with the unwavering support of loved ones, had opened the door to a new life. Standing in the foyer of my renovated home, I often paused at a small mirror hung by the door, a mirror that once belonged to my grandmother. The reflection that greeted me was no longer a frightened woman searching for scraps of validation. I saw a calm, self-assured face, framed by hair that I styled, however, I damn well pleased today, a loose cascade of waves falling just past my shoulders. The eyes that looked back glowed with a spark I hadn't seen in years. And so, as I locked the door behind me each morning, ready to take on whatever lay ahead, I carried with me the knowledge that love is possible again, that dreams can flourish even in the wake of devastation, and that the worst betrayals might just lead us to discover the best in ourselves. Thank you so much for joining me today at her Fireside Stories. What an incredible journey from heartbreak and betrayal to strength renewal and ultimate victory. Dahlia's courage in reclaiming her life after such devastating betrayal is truly inspiring. How did this story make you feel? Do you think Dahlia handled things the right way? Share your personal opinions, experiences, and reflections in the comments section below. And let us know from where you enjoyed today's powerful narrative. If you loved this story and want more heartwarming tales filled with twists, triumphs, and powerful life lessons, please click that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next episode. Until next time, keep your hearts warm and your stories burning bright.